Why this Soviet supersonic bomber is called the booze carrier. This is Tupolev Tu-22, the Soviet Union's first supersonic bomber which is capable of carrying nuclear warheads. It was first unveiled to the public on July 9, 1961 in an air show outside of Moscow. Among the Soviets, few Western representatives were also invited to this air show to observe Soviet Union's new fleet of airplanes. And when a fleet of these new supersonic bombers passed by these spectators, they were very surprised and could not believe the capabilities of these bombers, which resembled very close to the capabilities of American B-58 Hustler bomber. In the beginning, there were multiple nicknames given to this supersonic bomber by the West, for example, Bullshot, the Beauty, and the last one, Blinder, which stuck for many years to come. The Tupolev Tu-22 was a product of Tupolev Design Bureau. This bureau was responsible for the creation of most of the civilian and military aircrafts of the Soviet Union, the most prominent ones being the Tupolev Tu-4, the exact copy of the captured American B-29 Superfortress, and the most iconic and famous Tupolev Tu-95 nicknamed Bear, which is still in active duty today. During the 1950s, when the Cold War was in full swing, the Communist Party asked the different design bureaus to present different designs for a long-range supersonic bomber. The Tupolev Design Bureau created 3 different designs and presented its second design, the prototype named 105, to the Communist Party. After some debate in the party, the design was approved and the bureau was assigned to create the bomber in August of 1954. The plane was going to be based on already in production plane Tu-16 and was going to have a swept wing design. The cockpit would place the pilot forward and slightly to the left to increase the visual quality, and the fuselage was tube-shaped with a pointed nose. The crew entered the aircraft by lowering the seats on rails, climbing through extreme step ladders, taking their place and then cranking upwards to the cockpit. The plane was fitted with novelty downward fire and ejector seats. This direction meant that the minimum altitude for safe ejection was 1150 feet. The first plane produced by the Bureau had its first flight on June 21, 1958. The Bureau was not able to achieve the target set by the party for the plane, as it did not have the speed nor the range which was expected of it, and so the plane went under several design changes. The new plane was fitted with more powerful engines, and this prototype was named 105A. The second prototype flew on September 7, 1959, and it was a disaster for both crewmen and pilots, and many were lost during the landing and takeoffs. After a series of further tests and modifications, the aircraft went into production with the designated name of Tu-22. It was introduced to the West and the rest of the world on July 9, 1961 on an Aviation Day parade. Now let's get back to the first statement of this video. Why was this plane called the booze carrier? From the beginning, the Tu-22 Blinder had many problems, with serviceability and in-flight issues causing crashes. Therefore, many modifications were made to the existing models as well as to the newer ones. Other problems included the cockpit panels, which would block the runway view during the takeoff and landing, and slow landing speed, which could cause crashes. These issues made the Blinder very difficult plane to operate, and not every pilot was able to operate it. Hence, around only 16 of the best pilots from the Soviet Air Force was chosen to pilot these planes. But even these pilots were used to having a co-pilot with them who would assist them with the avionics and different operations during the flight. But the Blinder was a single-seater aircraft, so these pilots found it difficult to understand and operate these planes alone. And many crashes occurred due to these pilots being confused to understand and operate different panels of this aircraft. Alongside many other problems, one major issue was the oxygen system of the aircraft. The oxygen to the cabin was provided through a bleed air system which ran on engine's compressors. The problem was, when the Blinder flew to the sky, the air became hot, and so it had to be cooled down before sending it to the pilot. The engineers devised a solution with a mixture of 60% distilled water and 40% vodka, and so the Blinder was also nicknamed the booze carrier. This genius solution also caused another problem, that was alcoholism. The vodka mixture would cause the pilot to lose focus during the flight, and it also messed with their temper and behavior on and off the flights. In later models, this issue was resolved, but the nickname remained with the Tu-22 as the booze carrier. Now, let's discuss the later versions and the operational history of this aircraft. As discussed, the blinder was based on the Tu-16 and it was supposed to be superior to it, but it never achieved its desired targets. During the 1960s, Soviets began testing different ballistic systems, and so the whole program of the Tu-22 was put into jeopardy. To keep the blinder in service, the Tupolev Design Bureau created many different versions of the Tu-22 in order to forestall its usability. At first, they created a trainer version with a copilot. Then they made Tu-22K, which was capable of carrying the Kh-22 standoff weapon. And the third variant they created was the Tu-22P, which was designed for the electronic warfare. After 26 years of its production, the blinder saw its first combat mission, when the Tu-22PD variant was used to cover and provide radar jamming for the Soviet forces which were withdrawing from Afghanistan. Other than Soviet Union, the Tu-22 also saw action by the Libyan Air Force against Tanzania during the 1970s and in 1980s against Chad and Sudan. Iraq also used its fleet of Tu-22 in Iran-Iraq war during the 1990s. During the Gulf War, Iraq lost several Tu-22. The last version of the blinder was Tu-22M, which is a supersonic, long-range strategic and maritime bomber still in service of the Russian Air Force. The Tu-22 blinder or booze carrier was supposed to replace the Tu-16, but it lacked in many places and it was no easy plane to operate. But still, it remained as one of the most unique planes from the Soviet era, the Tupolev Tu-22 blinder or the booze carrier.